growth, I have directed that action on all our revenue initiatives be expedited. I have already issued a number of presidential directives on the disposal of recovered assets, deployment of the national trade window, as well as the immediate recovery of past due oil royalties, including by crude seizures if necessary. On asset recovery, in order to put to use for the benefit of all Nigerians monies and assets stolen from public treasury, we have on asset recovery, in order to put to use for the benefit of all Nigerians monies and assets stolen from public treasury, we have since the 2016 budget created a revenue line in the budget for stolen and recovered funds. Thus, every government project today benefits in one way or the other from recovered, looted funds. I have also directed all the relevant authorities to liquidate all recovered unencumbered assets, such as landed properties, buildings, and vehicles, so that these funds can be available to help in the funding of the budget, particularly the important infrastructure projects. Now to the 2018 budget. The 2018 budget was based on a benchmark oil price of $51 per barrel and oil production of 2.3 million barrels per day, and an exchange rate of 305 naira to United States dollar. Based on this, the federal government aggregate revenue of 7.17 trillion naira was projected to contribute to 2018 budget of 9.12 trillion naira. The projected deficit of 1.35 trillion naira, or 1.73% of GDP, was to be financed mainly by borrowing. In 2018, average oil production up to end of the third quarter was 1.95 million barrels per day, as against the estimated 2.3 million barrels per day for the entire year. However, average market price of Bonny light crude oil was higher, an average of $74 per barrel as at October, than the benchmark price of $15 in the budget. As at the end of the third quarter, federal government actual aggregate revenue was 2.84 trillion naira, which is 40% higher than 2017 revenue. The overall revenue performance is only 53% of the target in the 2018 budget, largely because some of items are yet to be actualized. We have now rolled this revenue item over to 2019. Of the total appropriation of 9.12 trillion naira, 4.59 trillion naira had been spent by 30th September 2018 against the prorated expenditure target of 6.84 trillion naira. This represents 67% performance. debt service, and the implementation of non-debt recurrent expenditure, notably payment of worker salaries and pensions, are on track. Despite the delay in the passage of the 2018 budget on the 20th of June 2018, the sum of 820.57 billion naira had been released for capital projects as at 14th December 2018. We have carried over capital projects that were not likely to be fully funded by year-end 2018 to 2019 budget. The 2019 budget proposal is intended to further place the economy on the path of inclusive, diversified, and sustainable growth in order to continue to lift significant numbers of our students out of poverty. The underlying drives of the 2019 revenue projections have been adjusted to reflect current realities. On the expenditure side, allocations to ministries, departments, and agencies of government were guided by the three objectives of the ERGP, which are: 1, restoring and sustaining growth; 2, investing in our people; and 3, building a globally competitive economy. The 2019 budget proposal is based on the following assumptions: A, oil price benchmark of $60 per barrel; B, oil production estimate of 2.3 million barrels per day, including condensates; C, exchange rate of 305 naira per American dollar; 4, real GDP growth of 3.01%, and E, inflation rate of 9.98%. Notwithstanding the recent softening in international oil prices, the considered view of most reputable analysts is that the downward trend in oil prices in recent months is not necessarily reflective of the outlook for 2019. However, as a responsible administration, we will continue to monitor the situation and will respond to any changes in the international oil price outlook for 2019. With regard to oil production, I have directed the NNPC to take all possible measures to achieve the targeted oil production of 2.3 million barrels per day. The total revenue is projected at 6.97 trillion naira, which is 3% lower than the 2018 estimate of 7.17 trillion naira, consisting of oil revenue projected at 3.73 trillion naira, while non-oil revenue is estimated at 1.39 trillion naira. Excuse me. Yes. We have allowed 305 billion naira, equivalent to 1 billion United States dollars, for underway recovery by NNPC on premium motor secrets in 2019. We will continue working to bring it downward so that such resources are freed up to meet the developmental needs of our people. Let me also take this opportunity to address and clarify the under-recoveries or subsidy on petrol. In a period of economic challenges, where purchasing power is weak, we must reduce some of the burden on Nigerians. The problem with subsidies in the past was abuse and corruption. Today, the government through the NNPC is the sole importer of premium PMC premium motor secrets, and therefore the under-recovery is from the NNPC's trading account. This means the possibility of some marketers falsifying claims is removed. The estimate for non-oil revenue consists of 799.52 billion naira from companies' income tax, 229.34 billion naira from value-added tax and customs duties of 302.5 billion naira. We have reduced our expectation from independent revenues to 624.58 billion naira. Other revenues expected in 2019 include various recoveries of 203.38 billion naira, 710 billion naira as proceeds from the restructuring of government equity in joint ventures and other sundry incomes of 104.1 billion naira. A total expenditure of 8.83 trillion naira is estimated for 2019 budget. This includes grants and donor funds of 209.92 billion naira. This provision is less than 2018 federal government appropriated expenditure estimate of 9.12 trillion naira. However, it is higher than the 8.6 trillion naira originally proposed by the executive branch to the National Assembly for 2018. The budget deficit is projected to decrease to 1.86 trillion naira, or 1.3% of the GDP. In 2019, from 1.95 trillion naira projected to 2018. This reduction is in line with our plans to progressively reduce deficit and borrowings over the medium term. The proposed 8.83 trillion naira of 2019 aggregate expenditure comprises A, recurrent cost of 4.04 trillion naira, recurrent. B, debt service of 2.14 trillion naira. And C, statutory transfers of about 492.36 billion naira. D, sinking fund of 120 billion naira, which will be used to retire maturing bond to local contractors. And E, capital expenditure of 2.031 trillion naira, including capital supplementation, but excluding the capital component of statutory transfers. The provision for statutory transfers in 2019 is 492.36 billion naira, which is a 7% decrease from 2018. However, transfers to Niger Delta Development Commission and the Universal Basic Education Commission are projected to be higher as they are directly related to the quantum of oil revenue. The sum of 2.14 trillion naira has been provided for debt service. Of this amount, 80% is to service domestic debt, which amounts to about 70% of the total debt. I will read that again. The sum of 2.14 trillion naira has been provided for debt service, of which amount 80% is to service domestic debt, which accounts for 70% of the total debt. Although our national debt is within sustainable limits, we need to increase our domestic resource mobilization to bring down our debt-revenue ratio over the medium term. A substantial part of the current cost proposal for 2019 is for payment of salaries and overheads in ministries providing critical public services as such. 569.07 billion naira for the Ministry of Interior. B, 435.62 billion naira for the Ministry of Defense. C, 462.24 billion naira for the Ministry of Education. And D, 315.62 billion naira for the Ministry of Health. The allocations to these ministries represent significant increases over votes in previous budgets, underscoring our commitment to increase investment in national security and human capital development. Personnel costs estimated at 2.29 trillion naira, currently amount to nearly 4% of projected revenues. 40%, I beg your pardon. Substantial savings have been made from wider use of integrated personnel payroll information system platform. I have directed that all MDAs must implement the IPPIS by March 2019. We have made provisions for staff promotion areas and recruitment by the armed forces, police, and paramilitary agencies. We have also provided for the settlement of inherited outstanding pension liabilities. Again, we have included provisions for the implementation of a new national minimum wage. Furthermore, 1% of the consolidated revenue fund amounting to 51.22 billion naira has been earmarked for the basic health care provision fund and other related commitments. Let me say something about minimum wage issue. I am committed to addressing the issue of a minimum wage, and I will be sending a bill to you, the National Assembly, on this. However, in order to avoid a fiscal crisis for the federal government, as well as the states, it is important to devise ways to ensure that its implementation does not lead to an increase in the level of borrowing. I am accordingly setting up a high-powered technical committee to advise on ways of funding an increase in the minimum wage and the attendant wage adjustments without having to resort to additional borrowings. The work of this technical committee will be the basis of a finance bill which will be submitted to the National Assembly alongside the minimum wage bill. In addition, the Technical Committee will recommend modalities for the implementation of the new minimum wage in such a manner as to maximize its inflationary impact, as well as ensure that its introduction does not lead to job losses. We have allocated 2.28 trillion naira for capital spending, inclusive of capital in statutory transfers. For comprehensiveness and transparency, the expenditure plans of the larger government-owned enterprises, as well as multilateral and bilateral project-tied loans, have been integrated into 2019 to 2021 medium-term fiscal framework, with the inclusion of 275.88 billion naira, representing capital for the larger government-owned enterprises and 556.02 billion naira for multilateral, bilateral project-tied loans. The aggregate capital budgeted is 3.12 trillion naira. This represents 30% of the total federal government of Nigeria's proposed expenditure budget of 219. In order to get full value for monies expended by the government over time and to avoid duplication and waste, our emphasis will continue to be on completion of existing projects. Accordingly, provisions have been made to carry over projects that are not likely to be fully funded under the 2018 budget to the 2019 capital budget. The allocation to the special intervention projects has been retained as 500 billion naira, consisting of 350 billion naira recurrent and 150 billion naira capital. This reflects our continued determination to pursue inclusive, gender-sensitive, and proper growth. In addition, to maintain the peace in the Niger Delta, the provision of 65 billion naira for the Presidential Amnesty Program has been retained in the 2019 budget. Similarly, the sum of 45 billion naira has been provided for the Northeast Intervention Fund, as well as the sum of 10 billion naira as take-off grant for the Northeast Development Commission. To further support small and medium-scale enterprises, which are the focus of our industrialization drive, we have set aside the sum of 15 billion naira for the recapitalization of the Bank for Agriculture and Bank of Agriculture and Industry. In addition, the sum of 10 billion naira is provided as a grant to the Bank of Industry for purpose of subsidizing the interest rates charged on loans to small and medium-scale enterprises. This is intended for them to access single-digit interest loans from Bank of Industry. Our vision is for such better prospects for all Nigerians. With careful economic management and the continued diversification of our production and revenue base, we will build an inclusive, stable economy for generations to come. In addition to the development of special economic zones, which will underpin our efforts to move forward from a mono economy that's oil-based. We intend to exploit the comparative advantage of 6 geopolitical zones and our 36 states by establishing 6 industrial parks and 109 sufficient production and processing centers across all 109 senatorial zones, including shared facilities. These clusters will have power, water, and broadband facilities with embedded regulatory services. The clusters will generate vibrant economic activity, stimulate small businesses, and create jobs across the length and breadth of Nigeria. A key objective going forward is to further encourage and enable prosperous small businesses. Our micro, small, and medium enterprises will accordingly benefit from improved access to funding, supporting infrastructure, and offtake arrangements by government and larger enterprises. They will leverage the government enterprise and empowerment program and the Anchor Borrowers program. Nigeria cannot afford to be left behind in the digital age. To create jobs for our young people, we will build a digital economy around the technology and creative sectors. In partnership with the states and the private sector, we are working on a project to increase broadband penetration across all geopolitical zones of the country, such that over the next 4 years, all the 774 local governments will be provided with fiber connectivity. Modern, up-to-date infrastructure is particularly important to boost economic activity. We will continue with our emphasis on power, roads, and rail. In addition to completing the Ibadan-Kano rail line, we will also embark and move rapidly to complete the Eastern Rail from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, passing through Aba, which will connect to Abakaliki, Oka, Enugu, Owerri, Umuahia, then through Makadi, Jos, Bauchi, and Gombe. The coastal rail from Calabar to Lagos will also be completed as we aim to build a true national rail network that links all state capitals. Our road projects will gather pace and priority projects under the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund, such as the Abuja-Kaduna-Kano Expressway, the second Niger Bridge, and the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway will be fast-tracked for early completion. We shall expand generation, transmission, and distribution of power from the national grid while developing innovative off-grid solutions for schools, hospitals, and markets. Efforts to improve hard infrastructure will be complemented by expanded reforms in the ease of doing business initiative. We will continue to remove obstacles, reduce costs, and ensure timely delivery of services. Our social investments and social protection arrangements will continue to be deepened by extending coverage to all states and increasing the number of school children being fed daily. This will, this will come with associated direct and indirect jobs across the value chain, including farmers, aggregators, processors, transporters, cooks, and servers. Every child counts. This is the guiding principle of our national educational system and entails far-reaching actions to boost digital literacy, infect functional skills to our school children, and retrain tens of thousands of teachers every year. Indeed, we must equip our children from a very young age with skills for the modern era by emphasizing education in science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Health is an important part of our aspirations for human capital development, and we will continue to strive to make our people healthy and happy. In addition to building world-class treatment centers, including for cancer, we will be establishing a health system that prioritizes primary health care so that millions of our people can be insured for a minimum package of services with the